When the outdated tactics get left behind, it's time we stop. Marketers look around when your ranking's going down.
Yes.
It's the Jim and Ann Show, the Jim and Ann Show. I'm Jim.
I'm Ann.
And today we're here with
Bill Hartzer.
Hey, Bill Hartzer has been around this industry since 1996. He's a blogger, he's a speaker, he's a podcaster, he's a famous Dallas SEO, he's an author, a search engine journal, course instructor, top level domain name and new Google, their new GTLD's expert, also an expert witness. He offers consulting and auditing and more at billhartzer.com. Yay! Welcome, Bill.
Thanks.
And first of all, Bill is also the domain expert. So my question is the domain background check. What do you look when you're doing it? What are you looking at? What is your service connected to that? And let's talk about that.
I'm saying, okay, well, I need a domain for my website. And, obviously there's, domain, people don't renew domain names. People use a domain name for a website and the business closes or something, it's a good domain name. And so as an SEO, there's certain things you want to do, obviously to kind of check it out to see there are different tasks, if you will. And so, for example, taking that domain name, put it in Google and see what comes up. Look at archive.org and see what type of website it was previously. Look at the backlinks. We want to see if we're going to use this for our business or it's not a burner domain and or a spammed domain. And so what I mean by that is, there may be a domain name that was an organization, was a 4-character, 5-character. There wasn't really any keyword in the domain, but it could be used for just about anything. And maybe years ago, some organization, some company had that domain name and they went out of business and that domain name dropped and somebody bought it. What tends to happen is, a big search engine spammer or some kind of, black hat SEO might buy it as an expired domain and they'll put, millions and millions of pages, PPC pages. I'm referring to, pills, porn, and casino. This content that has nothing to do with the domain name essentially get banned in the search engines and so forth. It
So
may
how
drop
can you tell
again.
if a site's been banned in a search engine?
That's a good question. The only really way is to get a hold of the domain and verify it in Google Search Console or Bing Webmaster Tools. See if there's a penalty. There are other ways you can put the domain name in the search engine. They know that the domain is dropped or expired. It may not be in Google.
What else I've done, which is throwing the domain into like SEMrush or SpyFu and trying to look at the ranking history and then
Yes,
correlate
exactly.
it with the Wayback Machine to be like, when did the site change or go back and how does that relate? Was it,
The other aspect would be actually to put it, can put it the domain name in quotes to see how people have mentioned it or other websites have mentioned it.
Can you still use tools like used to be whois.sc? I think it's called domaintools.com now, where you could look up the history ownership. But now that I know that everything is kind of domain by proxy, can you still, there used to be like an extra fee you could pay to Domain Tools to find out all the registrants through time. Is that still available? Do you know?
Yes. So that's kind of where I'm getting to a lot of my forensic domain name expert work. So there's a couple of different ways. So basically, when GDPR was instituted just a couple of years ago, the domain registrars decided that they would make sure that they were, safe from being targeted or have a penalty because of GDPR. It's a privacy-related thing. You cannot just give out people's information without permission and so forth. Domain registrars decided to automatically hide domain name, owners. The popular ones is Whoisology. Domain Tools is fairly expensive, but Domain Tools, Whoisology, and Domain IQ. I use Domain IQ several times a day. It does allow you to see the history of the ownership of that domain name, the current Whois record, and it's under privacy. Well, name servers, there are name servers that can give something away.
Mhm.
However, a lot of domain owners or website owners tend to try, and I emphasis try to hide around behind Cloudflare, because Cloudflare is a service that basically is, filters. You can't hide behind Cloudflare because there are ways to figure out where a domain name is actually hosted and what the original IP address is. And so we can get into things like, not only is there domain name history of who owns the domain name, and you can look at name server changes. There's a site called DNS Trails, which actually has a very good archive of DNS changes.
Got to ask the $1 million question here. Well, there's several of them, but I guess the biggest question is, everything you've described is incredibly fascinating, and the detective work and all that. Like anyone that's looking to buy a domain or switch a domain or buy an old expired domain or anything, like, should definitely contact Bill to have Bill do the investigative work. I'm curious, Bill, how much about your domain do you think that Google knows? Does Google know that you're the owner? Do they know all the past owners? Do they know the IPs? Do they know the other sites you own?
Didn't they mention that they knew when the domain changes the ownership, and almost like all the history is wiped out since there is a new owner? Do you believe that? What's your experience shows, or as to how much Google knows about the domain?
Yeah, so Google is the domain name registrar. They can see what we can see as far as the history goes. If a domain name is registered at Google using Google Domains, they have your customer data. They do not have customer data for, let's say, GoDaddy or Namecheap or Epic or Network Solutions and so forth, unless that it was made public. So if you went to GoDaddy and registered your domain and put it under privacy, Google would not have that information.
So when they said that, did they mean only for those domains that are registered with them?
They would have the actual underlying customer data, yes. And the only way for anybody to get it would be a court order. And if it's under HOA's privacy, you literally, have to get a court order to have that information released.
Is it a good idea or a bad idea to register your domain with Google?
Black Cat, I wouldn't.
There are positives and negatives. If you are using Google Advanced Protection on your Google account, there's other positives because they are one of the more secure registrars. Only if you are using Google Advanced Protection. Though, think about it this way, is using the same Google Analytics code on all your sites. If you're using in the same Google Search Console account, if you wanted to hide from Google, use a separate account, or you certainly would use a separate Google Analytics account. Just yesterday, found a huge network of sites where somebody was doing something not illegal, but something that they would get sued over. I was investigating a domain dispute on one domain name, and this person who is going to get sued used the same Google Analytics code on all their sites. That code number, and putting it in public www, which is a code search engine.
Wait, what is the name of that? There's a code.
Public www.
Public www?
Yes, it is the Google of code.
Ah,
And so if you were to take the Google Analytics code, that number, the UA hyphen whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and plug that into Google, you would not find that because Google don't give you that data. However, take that same Google Analytics code and put it in public www, and you will see every single site associated with that Google Analytics code.
Look around when your ranking's going down.